Hi and welcome to The Courageous Collective, the podcast where we celebrate diverse women who dare to do things differently. I'm Rupa Baradva, a copywriter and communication specialist. I work with women entrepreneurs to help them get clear on their brand messaging, and I help them become more visible to their target customers using PR.
And I'm Fardeep Edwards, founder of The Branding Fox, a design consultancy that supports women in business with their branding and design needs. After working in corporate roles, we both took the leap into self-employment and created our own businesses where our skills and experience could really shine. But something we both noticed was the lack of women that looked like us at events, on speaker panels and in the media.
Which is why we created the Courageous Collective podcast. This is our platform to celebrate and champion diverse women who are smashing it in their businesses. In each episode, we speak to a female founder about the story behind their business. We explore their inspirations, the challenges they faced and how they've dealt with them. And we talk about what they're yet to achieve.
Welcome to the Courageous Collective and enjoy today's episode. Hi and welcome to the Courageous Collective podcast, where we share inspirational stories of women of colour who are founders of creative businesses. Rupert and I love hearing from you, so if you don't already, please follow us on Instagram at @the_courageous_collective. It's becoming a lovely little community. Come and join us for advice, inspiration, and lots of motivation to help you feel more courageous. Now on to today's guest. We are very excited to chat with a woman who is a podcasting legend. Soma Ghosh has created more than 200 episodes of her brilliant podcast, the Career Happiness Podcast, where she shares advice and meets with experts to discuss how to be happy in your career. She is a qualified career advisor helping young people and professionals find career happiness. Most recently, Soma was announced as a delegate for UN Women in recognition of her advocacy of women and girls. Soma, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. That was a very kind of intro.
Well,
Thank you,
this is
ladies.
you, so it's great. It's great to be able to celebrate that.
Yeah.
And you've done over 200 episodes. That's amazing. And maybe we should start there. What made you start a podcast, and have you got any, big lessons that you've learned along the way?
Yeah, 200 episodes. When you put it that way, wow.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. It's quite a few episodes. I think for me personally, one of the main reasons I wanted to start a podcast is I'm a podcast enthusiast, as I'm sure you guys are as well. And I started listening to podcasts in 2017. And a lot of the careers podcasts that were out there, they were very kind of corporate, very straight narrowed, and very, very white. And not in a bad way, just I didn't see a representation of me on there. The other thing I didn't see is them talking about the education sector or the healthcare sector or sectors that were not represented in terms of the clients that I was working with. So I thought, okay, hang on a minute, should I start a podcast? And I kept on umming and ahhing about it. And it was only when I was working with my mentor at the time in 2018, she said, Shoma, start a podcast. You're talking about happiness. People are so unhappy at work. Why don't you start your own podcast? So I thought to myself, okay, yeah, let me start one. And I did again procrastinate and kind of I kind of just thought, should I, shouldn't I? And so for me, when I really, really got down to starting it, I wanted to think about the careers advice element because, again, a lot of the podcasts out there, they're great. They're giving very, very great tips, but I just didn't find them to be very informative or practical. So I wanted to do that on my podcast as well. And I think also the other reason I really wanted to start the podcast as well is because I am an introvert and I thought this would be a good medium to speak and to give advice in a free way, but also in a way where people can just listen when they're on the train, when they're stressed, they're going to work, or also when they're going for their walks or those kind of things. And it's evolved. And I think it actually, to be honest, grew more during the lockdown. That motivated me to carry on and be consistent. And in 2023, yesterday, I actually interviewed a lady who was kind of on the same list as me me and her name's Effie O'Brien, we were both listed on basically the best career moves podcast on Apple Podcasts. And when that happened, that again motivated me to continue on. And I realized if I'm going to be consistent with this, I'm going to see a pattern. And, I'd get messages and it was just about helping people in a way where people were not being helped. And I think, I spoke about racism on there, equality and diversity, all sorts of different things. But also, one of the areas within my business is helping parents with careers advice. And again, that was not being represented on podcasts. In terms of the biggest lesson that I've learned from the podcast, I guess I would say that even if you think you're unique, even if you think you're different, just start something. Don't let self-sabotage stop you. I've also learned that for me personally, having a podcast is about also trying to represent different groups and different peoples, because I'm really, really, I have a list of guests as well on my podcast who I want on there. I'm really, really picky about who I want on my podcast, because for me, I get lots of pitches. I'm sure you get lots of pitches that have nothing to do with the content quality of what I want my podcast to be. So also giving people a voice who maybe don't have that voice was very important for me. And that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned, that sometimes that could be also a great marketing tool for them as well. But yeah.
That's really interesting, isn't it? How you talk about being representative, and there wasn't anything like that out there before you started. It's part of the reason why Rupa and I started this as well. And it seems crazy to say in this day and age that we still haven't quite got that representation out there. So it's great that you started it, and that was one of the reasons and motivations for you.
Yeah. And it also, I think, 200 episodes, it just goes to show that something quite simple as having a conversation with another person or talking about, things that you've experienced with your clients. It is really simple, isn't it? Just having a conversation, but actually being able to tap into that. And it's such a unique way of getting across your business into somebody's ears very quickly whilst they may be doing something else. It's lovely. And yeah, we love podcasting over here. So yeah, great to have you here. So talk to us about career happiness. That's the name of your podcast. It's obviously your business as well. And honestly, is it possible to be happy in your career?
So, I mean, if we think about career happiness in general, I think that a lot of people are very cynical when you say career happiness, because we live in a world where I think people just think, okay, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to get a career, I'm going to train in that career, that's it, done, all right? It's really not as simple as that. When we think about career happiness, one of the main reasons I started the Career Happiness Mentor before I even had the podcast is because I really didn't realize that so many women, especially, were unhappy at work. And when I mean unhappy, I mean to the point where they would be going into work and they'd come home and they'd be crying because they have a toxic work colleague or they have a toxic situation at work, which is leading them to feel really, really unfulfilled and unhappy. So when we think about what career happiness is, everyone's going to have their own different version of what that means. I'm going to introduce to you guys the 4 career happiness pillars that I use within my work very quickly to kind of talk about this. One of them is confidence. That's the biggest thing that comes up in my work. And often when we're feeling unhappy at work, it's because we're feeling not very confident about the work that we're doing. And career happiness ties into confidence a lot. Clarity. So clarity is much more around purpose, why we do what we do, our values, that kind of thing. Then also support. A lot of the reason that clients come to me, sometimes they've got their own career coach in-house, but they haven't got an impartial person. So when they're looking at career happiness and what fulfills them and what makes them happy, they're being dictated what they should or shouldn't do, and it's not bespoke to them. So career happiness is also looking at what is important to you. So if you're a parent, how can you be flexible within your work? If you're a carer, what are the things that I can do to have a career where I can still maybe have a side hustle and have a day job? And how can that fit around my own values and beliefs? And the other one is well-being. So often, a lot of the women I'm working with right now, they are burnt out. They are, suffering from, overwork. And with this remote work culture we have, as great as it is, it's also not great. And a lot of the things that I'm talking about, I just started my LinkedIn newsletter recently, and I decided to speak about workplace trends on there because what people are not realizing, there's a term called resenteeism, which I spoke to Rupa about, I know previously. It means when someone stays in a job and they're worried about leaving because they're worried about financial issues or they're worried about work progression, and so they don't leave that job. And so what we're seeing is a lot of people end up resenting sometimes the work they do. And when we're thinking about career happiness, what's happening is people are not actually doing what they love. They're not looking at the things that are their strengths. They're not looking at their values. And they're not really addressing what is important to them as an individual. So for some people, career happiness could be just having a part-time job, but they can't do that because of financial obligations. For some people, it could be starting a business, but they let things like fear or what other people are going to say create that opportunity for them. And is it possible? Well, when we come to this part of the question, I think it really depends about your mindset and your ability to take things on. I think a lot of the reasons why people don't think it's possible is because if you're being very close-minded, if you're being really negative about career happiness, then of course it's not going to be possible. No, it's not. But if you look at it as an opportunity of, okay, how can I still have a job that's going to give me that regular, consistent income? Plus, I do the thing that I'm really interested in. And often when I'm working with clients, what I try and help them understand is that your definition isn't going to be the same as everyone else's. So I know I'm giving a very broad stroke answer here, but when the listeners are listening to this, I want them to think about what's important for them and maybe journal on that. And I give lots of exercise in my podcast as well to help with this. But I think ultimately career happiness is about the individual and what they want from life, what they want from their career, and also what they want from their own financial goals. But in essence, that's what I would say. But I would also say it is definitely possible, and it's about you taking accountability and action towards that.
Wow, so much to unpack there, Soma. Thank you for sharing that. I think, like I said, lots to unpack. Being honest with yourself and, as you said, holding yourself accountable and actually doing the work in order to then take action speaks, so clearly to me. I remember the days when I was in full-time employment. I was thinking, I just want to work for myself. I just want to work for myself. And it was that constant thing in my head. But I knew I wasn't happy in my day job. And then that whole, resenting, what I was doing kept on happening and impacted kind of how I was feeling. And I think the breakthrough came when I realized that in order to build that business that I want, I actually need this job to be able to then, build that life and that business. So yeah, that is so helpful to kind of hear that. And also the 4 pillars as well. I think they're key. And actually, I know you work particularly with women who are professionals and, as you mentioned, young adults starting careers, etc. But I think those 4 pillars, they mean something to everybody, really, aren't they? As you said, that they help us all find happiness within our career or business. So yeah, definitely lots for us to unpack there.
Yeah, definitely. There's something really interesting around being individual support as well, because I think as a woman and as a mum, that journey varies quite a bit throughout the course of our lives as well. And there will be different things that are important to you than they were in your 20s or 30s, wherever you are in that life as well. So yeah, I think that's really key, because I do find there's quite a lot of generic career advice out there, and a lot that I personally come across doesn't really take into account that I'm a working mum from home, but I want to earn, do you know what I mean? What I want to earn and work how I want to work. It does sometimes feel a little bit out of reach. So it's so interesting when you talk about the happiness aspect, because it's so individual, isn't it, in terms of what's going to be right for you. Yeah. So do you want to just tell us about your business and the sort of clients that you work with? Are they predominantly working as an employee? Do they have their own business? Are there any particular sort of stages of their career that they might be at? Just talk us a bit more about your business and the people that you help.
Yeah, so I work predominantly with 3 groups of clients. The main focus is working with professional women who want careers advice and mentoring. The second is working with parents of teenagers who want careers advice for their teenagers. Usually those teenagers are from year 9 to year 13. And the third group is business owners. But I kind of do the business owners work very kind of maybe like a couple of times in the year. The main 2 focuses are on the careers advice element. And for me, the reason why I really wanted to focus on the professional women is because I was one of those professional women who was unhappy at work. I went through a place at work where I was bullied at work and I was very unhappy. And when that happened to me, when I started talking about it on LinkedIn, there was a whole load of people who were telling me that this is happening to me, Soma.
Oh, wow.
And also, what was very interesting about workplace bullying is a lot of women of color were telling me this is happening to me. I'm having, kind of things which are signalings of bullying happening to me. And so when I started to talk about those things, I realized, hang on a minute, it's so much more bigger and deeper than just me giving the careers advice. So yes, I was giving the careers advice to help the career changer, to help the person who wanted to leave their job, to help the person who wanted to develop their career. But also, there was this underlying thing going on within their job where they were not being seen. They were not being valued as a woman of color. And then, deeper than that, if there was something going on, so I've had a client way back when, I remember, nobody spoke to her in her office. Nobody. She would go to work, she would do the job, nobody. I mean, can you imagine how horrible?
That's awful.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's a form of bullying, right? Definitely. And ultimately, she didn't work there anymore. She left and she got a new job. But she lost her confidence completely. So what do you do? Because when you go to your manager or boss, they'll just say, "Oh, just carry on, just do what you need to do." So when I've had clients like that, it's about helping them readdress what their confidence means to them, what their happiness means to them. So getting clear about that. So when I'm working with those professional women, I have to do an element of career counseling with them as well, because they've lost their sense of morale, they've lost their sense of direction. And a lot of those professionals don't just work within, professional backgrounds. I have worked with a couple of doctors, but I've also worked with people who are administrators in the NHS, or they do something else within the NHS. Lots of different kind of industries, and the education field as well. For me, it's about being representative of all different sectors of the workforce, not just the corporate sector, because I think, as I said, there's a lot of stuff to help people in the corporate world. If we look at the parents of teens, the reason why that would come up a lot is because when parents are going for parents' evenings or information around careers, they would come back to me and say, "But my son had a 20-minute meeting and I still don't know what my son wants to do. Like, help. Can you help me?"
Funny enough, I've got one of those evenings tonight. My son's in year 9. That's hilarious that you mentioned that.
Yeah. But these are the kind of emails that I would have come through, where people were like, "Yeah, he had a 20-minute meeting and he's still none the wiser. Like, what am I going to do?" So because I'd been in that education field for a while and I developed my own kind of system and I knew a lot, I had a brilliant mentor when I worked in Islington in London. I just thought, okay, if parents are asking for this, why don't I turn it into a service?
Yeah.
And those are the 2 kind of sectors that I feel a lot of passion around. The business stuff has only kind of naturally happened because as a business owner, people have asked me about podcasting, but they have also asked me about how do you market your business and things like that, which takes time. It's, so there are some elements that I'm still working towards that. One of the new things that I want to quickly mention is I'll be doing more workshops around the business stuff that I offer. But yeah, in essence, that's my business. Yeah.
Wow, what a brilliant business as well. I think really interesting the fact that you work with professional women. Vardeep and I have both worked in corporates, and I think we can definitely relate to some of the things that you've shared. And sorry to hear about the bullying as well, because unfortunately it's just all too common. as I'm sure you're hearing from your clients. Wanted to get your take on workplaces, and actually how can workplaces, in your opinion, support women more? Are there any things that, I know obviously your clients are obviously professional women, but if we were to kind of turn that on its head and actually look at these, companies, how can they support women more?
So it's interesting. The newsletter that I mentioned, I actually spoke about employee well-being in there. The thing that is very, very important and that employers are actually looking at is employee well-being. So the biggest thing they can do is to look at the individual who is maybe, quiet quitting. I'm going to use that term and I'll explain it for the listeners who may not be familiar with that term in a minute, because I don't want to just say something and people not know. People who are usually unhappy at work, quiet quitting is usually when somebody is working in a job and they're doing the bare minimum in that job, but they're not going above and beyond because either they're not enjoying that job or they're not being motivated in that job. So what employers should be doing is they should be looking out for the person who's not got their camera turned on during meetings, because usually that can be because there's something else going on. But if they're doing that regularly, or they're not turning up to meetings, or they're not interacting with the staff, or they're not even going for the kind of in-person meetings, something is going on there. They're probably very deeply unhappy. So managers and people who are in leadership, and even just your fellow colleagues, should be looking out for anyone who is kind of slowly slipping away, because usually they're probably applying for jobs on the sidelines as well, which is fair enough. I understand that if you're really, really unhappy. But employers in general should be looking at making sure that if they want to retain staff, if they want to make people happy at work, that they're looking for any warning signals and they're understanding. A lot of the time, managers and other people don't even have the basic training to understand that their work colleagues are unhappy. And this is one of the reasons why people are leaving. But even deeper than that, I think the issue is that they've got to understand working as a team. I've recently done an episode on the podcast about why do people not talk to each other at work anymore. And one of the reasons I did that episode is because people have stopped communicating with each other. Some people, especially during lockdown, they were joining new companies and, they're meeting people 3 years later. They don't even know their names. So employers should also be thinking about how can we bring people together as a team so that people know each other? How can we have, social days? There's lots they can do, but I think in terms of that well-being element and making sure that people are happy and not being bullied, if something is happening, to address it and to believe that person. The biggest thing for me that I'm finding is people are not believed. And that can make people feel like, well, I'm not worth it here. I don't deserve to be here. In that way, I'm just moving on, depending on what your personal attitude is. And in some cases, one thing that I do want to share, not to get too serious, is that on top of seeing me, they have to go see a therapist if they're in a really bad place, because I think a lot of times people don't realize that workplace happiness isn't just about doing the work and being happy in that job. It's also about a mental health aspect, and employers are not giving them that help either. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say. I know that's quite a heavy answer, but I wanted to answer it as best as I could.
Yeah, and such a good answer, I think, because you've covered lots of different things. I think the trust aspect for me is a really big one, and actually, workplaces that trust their people to work remotely, to work flexibly, just to basically do their jobs, trust people to do their jobs. They're probably the workplaces that are going to be the ones that, retain and attract great people. And essentially that's what you want. But you also, as an employee, want to thrive in your job. You want to do a job where, it's more than just turning up and doing something. You gain so much more from it. It's really interesting you say that communication has decreased between colleagues as well, because I think that was one of the main reasons why I stuck around in employment for so long, is that social element, because I gained so much from sitting with my colleagues, not just learning from them informally, but also building friendships and going for a coffee or having those water cooler moments. Those were really important parts of building my career as well. And I think the pandemic, obviously working remotely, that has definitely changed things. But I think there are still opportunities for employers to bring that back in ways that aren't like novelty things, that are kind of a bit more deep and meaningful and actually really thought about. And in order to do that, they really have to understand who their employees are. So if they are women, men, whoever they may be, actually talking to their people. I mean, it sounds so simple, but even just doing that can really help, bring their employees along the way, rather than kind of just expecting them to get on with their jobs and kind of that's it. So
Yeah, so that brings us on to talking about imposter syndrome. We hear that quite a lot, and I wonder if there's an element of that going on with some of your clients as well, as business founders, as professional women. What's your view of imposter syndrome, and can you recommend any strategies to help overcome it?
Yeah, no, I mean, my view is it's really interesting because I was talking about this yesterday with someone. Imposter syndrome definitely does exist, because there's also like a lot of contention around it. Oh, imposter syndrome doesn't exist. It's this thing that women have just made up so they can get more sympathy. No, it does exist. And I think my view around it is that often, when we feel like a fraud, when we feel like we're not good enough, it usually is to do with our childhood or something that's happened to us. And if you're a woman of color as well, there's probably a lot of microaggressions and things that have happened to you. So you're going to maybe feel a little bit more of an imposter. Like, I remember way back when I worked in a team where I was the only brown person, and I remember thinking, okay, everyone's judging me just that tiny bit more, because there were little things that would happen. And when I work with my clients, they also are in those scenarios sometimes. And I think in terms of the strategies, in terms of my own clients, there is an element sometimes they get imposter syndrome, especially if they get promoted very, very quickly, or if they're given very, very important projects to do, because they've been told a lot of their life that perhaps, oh, okay, you need to do above and beyond, because there's a people pleasing element in our South Asian culture, and we always try to please people all the time. So by doing that, you may even be thinking, oh, okay, I actually have to fake it to make it kind of thing. And I think when we think about strategies to help women with imposter syndrome, or any of the listeners who are listening today, I think the first thing that you've got to think about is to understand what the triggers are that are causing you to have imposter syndrome. I mentioned my story of being one of the only brown people in the team. The reason it was a trigger for me is because I know I was being treated differently in that team. For some people, the trigger could be that, they have always compared themselves to other people, or they've been compared to their sibling, or they've been compared to other work colleagues. And I think when we look at ways to help people with imposter syndrome, when you call yourself a fraud, instead of saying, I'm a fraud, I'm not good enough, this isn't what I do, look at all the things that you have achieved, look at all the things that you have accomplished, because when we say things like, oh, we don't deserve to be in this role because of dot, 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 I've done it to myself in the past when I've done well in my career. I've actually been able to do it because, no, somebody has believed in me. Somebody believes I'm good enough to be in this role. So for anybody who out there is listening today, what I would say is look at what you know you're already good at. Look at your strengths, firstly. The second thing I would say as well is look at evidence that is showing the opposite of your beliefs. We all suffer from FOMO. We all suffer from this element of, you know, feeling as though we're not good enough because of things that have happened in our past. Working on those self-limiting beliefs is what I would say as well. And they're all going to be different for everybody, and I'm trying to make the answer to this question open, because I don't want to generalize. But I also want to say that when we think about imposter syndrome as well as a whole, often it's because we've been othered and we've been made to feel like we aren't good enough. So instead of feeling like, oh, poor me, and playing the victim, what we've got to do is we've got to think to ourselves, no, I did this because somebody gave me a chance, and I did this because I actually asked for that opportunity.
Yeah.
But those are some of the things that I would say. It is a big question, so
Yes, it is. Yeah, no. I
yeah.
appreciate there's probably a lot more going on, because something that cropped up in my mind as you're speaking about that is me personally, as well as some other women that I've kind of known along the way, quite often have done, and I think we've spoken this with a couple of guests before as well, lots of courses and training, especially those women who are starting or have started their own businesses. And there's been a bit of a, I've got to do this course before I can do that. I've got to get this qualification before I can say I've got this thing. And for me, that's like an element of imposter syndrome, because you don't feel like you're good enough unless you've got this label or something to say, no, I am qualified because I've done this thing, So but I appreciate it's a massive subject, isn't it? There's a lot more kind of sort of is bubbling away under the surface.
And I think kind of leading on quite nicely to that is how you market your business, because obviously imposter syndrome sometimes does play a part in that. And what do you find works well?
So, I mean, a lot of my business is marketed obviously through LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn probably the most for the business that I have. And some of it is also through the blogs I've written, my newsletters, those kind of things. When I started out in my business back in 2016, I used to be on Facebook quite a lot, but it's changed a lot since then. And I think it's changed a lot because my business has changed. I think for me personally, the most important thing when we're thinking about marketing is about the quality of content, not the quantity. Because I think sometimes we all see a lot of content online, and it's all very well reading content, but it's about having a strategy in place to make sure that you have looked at what the pain points are for your client, but not just the pain points, the problems. What is it that you're actually solving? What is it that you are providing as a solution? I market it through social media, yes, a little bit, but I also think that once you've established your brand, whatever your brand may be, people will recommend you. And that's usually kind of how people hear about me, through word of mouth. And also, the podcast has been a brilliant way to market the business because it's helped me kind of appear on places like BBC Women's Hour. That's how they got in touch with me, because of the podcast. Wow. And I think also platforms like Twitter are actually very good for promoting your podcast, believe it or not. That's kind of how I've grown the podcast a little bit. But also just, networking with people. And when I mean networking, I don't mean like being in a boardroom meeting and having a boring conversation with them. Kind of like, when me and Rupert met recently for coffee, just having coffees with people individually and trying to get to know them. And then finding out more about you helps you build your personal brand and helps people understand who you are. Because when you're just a picture on a computer screen, that's it. You're not really getting to know the real person. But those are kind of like the ways that I market my business currently.
Yeah, and it was great meeting for a coffee because, like you said, first of all, meeting someone in person is, it's lovely to be able to put a face to a name and actually build that relationship. But also, we found we had lots in common, and actually that was so nice because, being a business founder can be quite lonely. We've talked about this lots before on this podcast, but little things like going for a coffee and actually reaching out to somebody and being able to have a conversation, whether it's online or in person, can make such a big difference. And once you've got that person in your corner, when something comes up, they can always recommend you as well. So that's a really good strategy, definitely.
And so earlier on in our conversation, you spoke about not a lot of representation in terms of the podcast that you put out. Do you feel like that's changed? And how do you feel about some of the events and networking and the sort of relationships that you've built as well? Do you think it's more representative? Have you noticed a difference at all in your business journey?
It's interesting when you mention podcasts, because one thing that I forgot to mention, actually, interesting, is last year And last year was a really challenging year for my health, which I won't go into on this podcast. Most people know because I've documented it online. One thing that really happened for my podcast that really kind of made me think, whoa, this is like things are maybe changing a little bit in terms of visibility. We've still got a long way to go. There's still lots to go. Is that it got nominated for an international women's podcast in I can't remember what category it was now, but because it's a very long title, the category that it got nominated for. But when that happened, that made me realize there's so many amazing people who are trying to be seen, and finally it's not just the British Podcast Awards. No disrespect to them, they also do try and represent, but it's always usually the popular podcasts on there, right? It's not usually the indie podcasts or the podcasts that are trying to do something different, right? And in terms of the representation, I do think that when that happened for me, that was like really, really a big achievement, not just for myself, but I saw lots of other people of colour being represented, because that platform are known for actually helping push indie podcasts and women of colour. They're brilliant. However, what I would also say around this as well is that when I'm thinking about networking and stuff, you do feel a sense of, recently on my podcast, I spoke to a non-binary person, and although they were white, they're an ally and they're doing a lot of really, really great work. And they were telling me that, still she's seeing as a white person, brown people and black people being ignored because she's an ally. So she's educating herself all the time. So when you think about the networks, you do see an element of favoritism. You see an element of, dare I say the word, and I know I've got in trouble on LinkedIn for saying this, cliques, right? But people do not want to admit this stuff is going on. So it's also about, for the listeners, I want to say this, not getting too bogged down with what other people are doing, trying to do what feels right for you, because what ends up happening is when you're looking at what other people are doing on social media especially, you end up getting comparison, and then you end up just being like, I'm just not going to show up because they have this brilliant network and I'm nobody. You have to create your own network is what I would say. I hope that kind of answers the question.
No, it is, and it's such an important point to make, I think, in today's digital world. When I was at university, there was no online world, so it was very different. And I know we all have probably had to navigate that over the years, and there is a lot of comparison itis. It's even more prevalent now that we've got the online world, because suddenly our world is a lot more bigger, being in touch with more potential people. So it is. Yeah, it's really important to build your own tribe, isn't it? Your own network of people who get you and are able to support you and be able to have your back, like, you've said as well, Rupa, on this journey.
Definitely. And I think that brings us quite nicely onto our next question. So when we met, you mentioned that you're taking a break away from social media. It's something that you do quite frequently. And I was intrigued. And could you share a little bit more about that, please? And obviously being a business owner as well, how does that kind of work?
Yeah, so this is something I try to do every quarter. It isn't easy because you get messages from potential clients, from other business owners to collaborate. It's not easy. But I started doing this last year because one of the things I noticed is when I was off last year, I had to take a period of time off because I was very unwell. I would go on Instagram and I'd be like, whoops, I'm so overwhelmed. What is going on here? And it began to have an effect on my mental health. And I've been doing a lot of reading recently. One of the books I've been reading is Deep Work by Cal Newport, who is a productivity expert and, just amazing at what he does. And he's talking about how social media is actually ruining not just our cognitive function, it's ruining our ability to get work done. So as a result of that, I began to think about this and I began to think, oh my God, how much time am I wasting on this device of mine?
Scary,
Oops.
isn't it?
Yeah. Oops. And he calls it shallow work when you're doing things just for the sake of doing it, right? Or admin. Even some admin is shallow, for example, he says. He talks more about this on his podcast and books. So, I'm probably not describing it the same way he does. But for me, when I decided to do this, what I try and do in the evening is I try and turn my phone off before 9 o'clock, and I put it in a drawer. I do have a drawer in my office where I tuck it away, and my husband has even caught me like going back and trying to get it and look at it, and he's like, "What are you doing? You're meant to put it away," because I've told him to be my accountability buddy in terms of not going back on it.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I do. But the other thing, and the other reason why I started to do this, is because I realized there was lots of this unnecessary self-adulation going on, especially on LinkedIn. Like, I love LinkedIn as a platform, love it. But all everybody was doing was just talking about how wonderful their life is, how wonderful they are every time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where is the real content? There's no, like, the content that's meant to be helping people.
Yeah.
And I began to feel a bit fed up by that. I was just like, no, this is too much for me. And so for me, the way to navigate this as a business owner is to just be really, really strict. So in the morning, I don't look at my phone until 8 o'clock, which is hard, right? But instead I'll do yoga, meditation. I have a morning practice. Also, the other ways to navigate this as a business owner is that sometimes those leads that you get on Instagram or you get on LinkedIn, yes, they could be great, but are they truly your ideal client? So looking at whether or not that person is just someone who's trying to waste your time and get free advice. So also being just a bit more strategic as well in terms of how I use social media, because what I found is it's just helped me get a lot more work done. And that's why I've been doing it. Yeah.
That's a great, I mean, what better motivator, eh?
I'm very impressed at how disciplined you are with your phone and your routine and the 9 o'clock lockdown. It's it's crazy that we can't do that, can we now? We never used to have phones, and suddenly it's it's attached to us. So hats off to you. That's very well done. So I mean, you've spoken a little bit about this, but what kind of motivates you as a business founder?
A lot of things, but I think the main thing is that, and I said this to Rupert, I'm going to say it again, I am a career geek and I'm proud of it. And what I mean by that is I really love my subject matter. I have a lot of love for it. I have a lot of passion for it. But also when I get to see clients progress onto a job that they love or progress onto something that they really enjoy, that brings me a sense of purpose. That is, in essence, a lot of the reason why I do what I do. But also, and I've said this on my podcast a couple of times, I don't want anyone to be unhappy at work and burn out and go into depression and anxiety like I was. For me, that's a big purpose, because there's more and more articles about how people in their 20s are suffering with mental health problems. And I do actually get inquiries from younger clients as well. I've worked with a couple of younger clients in the Gen Z age group. And I think they view work very, very differently to us. So for me, when I'm seeing what's going on with them, plus, I'm an elder millennial, plus millennials, plus people who are older, I'm seeing different generations of how we work. So for me, it's that passion and that drive to continue to want to just help people with careers. It just motivates me to do my work. But that's the main purpose, I guess.
It sounds like you kind of, you walk the walk in terms of what you advice you give your clients.
Yeah, definitely try. Yeah.
So Shoma, last question from us then. You mentioned that you've been on the radio, you talked to Women's Hour, you've been featured in media. Some of our listeners might be interested in building their profile. What's your biggest piece of advice? How do you kind of stand out and kind of, promote yourself?
So this is a really interesting question, to be honest, Rupanwadi, because this has happened organically. I'll be honest. Twitter a few years ago was a great, there's the hashtag journal request. It's a great way of starting off with this at the beginning. But naturally, if you start building very good content or quality content, so blogs, podcasts, using your SEO, people are looking for experts all the time. People are looking for people who have a voice. And so by me even appearing on a couple of podcasts, I've established relationships with people from stylists and places like that. And so when something drops, they won't even put it on Twitter. They'll email me and they'll just say, Shoma, can you comment on this? So it's been an ongoing journey where I would also say make sure that you build a relationship with certain journalists, follow them, take an interest in what they're doing, but also try to pitch to them ideas as well, because you never know when that pitch will hit with them. And even if they don't resonate with the pitch straight away, you're going to be on a database where they'll come back to you, is what I would say as well. And also, if you are looking for PR, if that's a goal of yours in your business, then I would also advise you to think about how you're going to do that. Is it going to be by you contributing to an article? Is it going to be by you sending that email to a bigger podcast? The reason I say that is because often people have asked me, oh, how did you do it? And I'm not just being humble by saying it happened organically. It did. But also, I think you've got to be open to opportunities. If somebody emails you for a quote on something, don't see it as, oh, this is wasting my time. Do it as though you were writing your own article, because when I've done that, I've created content from that as well. Mm-hmm. So be strategic. But those are some of the things that I would say about it. Yeah.
And you know what, they're brilliant pieces of advice. As a PR, I think you're hitting the nail on the head there. I think, yeah, definitely curating interesting, insightful content to show yourself as a expert and building relationships. I mean, you know, if you can nail those two things, you can definitely gain some good PR. Soma, it's been so wonderful talking to you. Thank you. You've given us lots of food for thought, great advice. And you've kept it real, which we love. We've loved hearing from you. So thank you. If you want to find career happiness, do listen to Soma's Career Happiness podcast. You can find her on LinkedIn and Instagram too. We'll share your social handles in the show notes. And that's it for this week. Did you enjoy the episode? What would you like us to focus on in future episodes? Let us know on Instagram at _courageous_collective. We would love to hear from you. We will see you in a fortnight with a new episode. Thanks and goodbye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. The Courageous Collective is created by Rupa Bharadwaj and Vardeep Edwards. We really appreciate your feedback, so please like, share and follow us. Please also subscribe to receive an alert for our next episode.
You can find out where to follow us on social media in the show notes. And if you'd like to be a future guest, please do get in touch. Thanks and see you soon.